All right. Hello again, adventurers, and welcome to another exciting episode of D&D Deep Dive, the show where we dive deep into classes, subclasses, and other features of 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons to help you get the most out of your choices. So, today, we are going to be looking at the Barbarian. Looking at its defining features and how, if you are trying to homebrew options for the Barbarian, how you can kind of modify those to create some really interesting things. Quick reminder, if you are enjoying this content, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon, turn notifications on. All those things are super important to this video being seen by other people. That being said, let's dive into this. So, the Barbarian. Barbarian is one of the quote-unquote newer classes to D&D, and by that I mean it didn't exist in original D&D or first edition Dungeons and Dragons. I believe the Barbarian eventually showed up in second edition D&D, and then by third edition it had become a regular thing. But it was not part of the original release of D&D second edition. And the Barbarian is an interesting class because a lot of people that look at it and a lot of people that think about it simply just think of, oh, he's a dude that goes and just kills everything, which you can play your Barbarian like that and it will work really well depending on the subclass that you choose. But like most classes in 5th edition, the 5th edition Barbarian is a little bit more complicated than that. And when you start looking at the defining features of the Barbarian, you start seeing that it has a much wider range beyond the idea of, me hit thing with axe. Yeah, normally I have like this cool history lesson. Barbarians just have not been like super popular. Like for the most part, when people think of barbarians in D&D history, you think of Minsk from the Baldur's Gate series, and then really you might think of, I can't even remember the character's name, but in the D&D the D&D cartoon, I believe one of them was a barbarian, which would point to the fact that I guess the Barbarian has to have existed longer than second edition, because the cartoon came out way back in first edition, way back in the like mid 80s. So I guess it's a little older than I thought. But other than those, and then Grog from the first campaign of Critical Role, there just haven't been a ton of barbarians that get really famous compared to something like Rangers. You have Drizzt, or fighters. There's countless fighters that have become famous. Or wizards, you have Elminster and all those other things like that. But barbarians, just again, a lot of people think them are kind of a shallow class, and they're not. They're actually really interesting and cool. You just have to understand them to really get the depth out of it, and they can be played pretty flat as well. So, let's dive into those defining features now. Quick refresher on 5th edition class design. Sorry, I have something in my throat and it's annoying the hell out of me. All right. In 5th edition D&D, every class is designed to play very differently right from the beginning. In order to do that, they have these things that we call defining features. A defining feature is either something that is unique to the class, or maybe it's not unique, but the class either gets it earlier or can use it differently than any other class. Now, in order for something to be considered a defining feature, it does need to show up within the first 2 levels. So, what are the defining features of the Barbarian? Well, in level 1 and 2, the Barbarian gets 4 features. And actually, all of them kind of fit the idea of a defining feature really well. The first one, and the one that everybody thinks about when they think of a barbarian, is rage. Rage, again, is another one of those abilities that a lot of people misunderstand the entirety of its purpose, because it does a lot of things. Raging basically is a bonus action. You can enter a rage. It lasts for a minute, or it can end early under a couple conditions. If you don't make an attack or take any damage for a turn, it will end. Or if you are rendered unconscious by any means, it will end. Otherwise, for a minute, which as we've talked before, a minute is 10 rounds of combat. Most combat in 5th edition ends between about 4 and 6 rounds. So this is the entirety of battle, effectively. So what happens when you rage? Well, you get advantage on strength checks and strength saving throws. Strength saving throws are not super common. They generally tend to be resisting forced movement. Strength checks, there's a lot of different things you might use a strength check in the middle of combat for, but things like a grapple would be a contested strength check. So things like that, raging makes you better at. When you make a melee weapon attack using strength, you gain a bonus to the damage roll that increases as you gain levels as a barbarian, as shown in the rage damage column of the barbarian table. Basically, every attack you make while you are raging, you get extra damage that gets bigger as you go. Now, it is a flat number. It's not an additional die, so critting doesn't make that any bigger, but much later in the class, barbarians eventually get an ability called, Brutal Critical at level 9. And Brutal Critical basically lets them roll additional damage dice when they roll crits. So it's not that big a deal that their rage damage doesn't increase. And it does mean as they get extra attack, and basically anytime you give barbarians additional attacks, they're going to get more benefit out of it than other classes, simply because of that additional damage. And then you also gain resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage. And that is where a lot of people misunderstand what rage is about, because the barbarian has 2 roles, and most people only think about one. Barbarians do a ton of damage. That is what they're meant to do. They are weapons-based damage dealers, and they do it really well. They can use really, really big weapons. An incredibly common thing to see for a barbarian is for them to use a great axe for their weapon, and to take the Great Weapon Fighter feat. And when you combine both of those, they become just absolute damage machines, because a Great Axe gives you a d12 for your damage. We'll talk about another thing they get at level 2 that makes it so they hit a lot more often, they crit a lot more often. And then Great Weapon Fighter lets you take a -5 to your attack roll to get a +10 to your damage roll. So when you combine all those things, barbarians do a lot of damage. However, a lot of people think the resistance to bludgeoning, piercing, and slashing damage is just kind of a thing that's like, oh, well, since they're going to be in combat so much, we want them to be able to take a few more hits so that they can do more damage. And that's not the whole story. And we'll discover, as we look through the other defining features, exactly why it's not. Barbarians have 2 jobs. 1 is to do a lot of damage. 2 is to take the hits that the rest of the team would normally take. Barbarians have the largest hit die in the game. They get a d12. They're the only class that gets a d12 for their hit die. So because of that, barbarians can take a lot of damage. And then when they're raging, they have resistance to basically all physical damage. Resistance in 5th edition means you take half damage. So not only do they have more hit points than any other class, they are also taking half damage from all physical attacks most of the time that they're in combat. You start off with 2 rages. So that means 2 combat encounters per day. And again, this is supposed to be balanced around the idea of having anywhere between 4 to 6 combat encounters per adventuring day. Most people don't play that way. I certainly do not generally at first level, and at first level you're not going to get 6 combat encounters. You might get 3 or 4. So at first level, you're going to be raging most of the time that you're in combat. They eventually get, by level 17, they have 6 rages per day, and then at level 20, they just have an unlimited number of rages per day. But it means that most of the time that they're in combat, they're going to be raging, they're going to be taking half damage, on top of the fact that they have a very high hit die, and Constitution is really important to them. We'll find out in a second here. So they just have tons of hit points. So playing a Barbarian well is incentivizing the enemy to attack you. This is a more subtle form of action economy control, because the same attack that hits a Barbarian that's raging, instead of hitting a monk or a fighter that is not raging, is going to be half as effective against the Barbarian. Right at the get-go, it's going to take half the number of hit points. Now, when you compare it to just like their percentage of damage done to their total hit point pool, it's going to be even less effective, because Barbarians just have tons of hit points. So, yes, Rage gives you a lot of attack. But if you actually look at what Rage does, you actually get a significantly more beneficial bonus from your resistance than you will ever get from the bonus damage that you get. Like, the best your bonus damage gets to is a +4. So, if you're using extra attack, that is 8 additional damage per turn. Meaning, for you to reduce the same amount of damage from the enemy to you that you get from your rage, you would only need to take 16 points of physical damage each turn, which happens a lot for a Barbarian. Like, that's literally nothing. When you start getting to really high levels, that is less than a single round of it attacks. So, yeah, the Barbarian the Barbarian actually gets more benefit from just the base rage feature from the resistance than it does the defensive aspect of rage than the offensive aspect of rage. I think a lot of people misunderstand that and think of the Barbarian mostly as, I'm going to go out and kill things, as opposed to, I'm going to go out and kill things, yes, but I'm also going to encourage the enemies to attack me instead of attacking my friends. So, yes, that is rage. Moving on. The second thing that they get at first level is called Unarmored Defense. This is very similar to the Monk's version of Unarmored Defense, but it's got a couple just slight changes that fit the Barbarian better. Basically, when you're not wearing armor, your armor class equals 10 plus your Dex mod plus your Constitution modifier, and you can use a shield and still gain this benefit. For the Monk, they can't use shields. Excuse me, I'm very sorry about that. But Barbarians can. So they can have a little bit higher bonus. Now, the big thing here is Barbarians, for Rage, they have to make melee attacks using Strength. So you cannot build a Dex-based Barbarian because they wouldn't get their offensive benefit from their Rage. So Dexterity is generally going to be a little bit lower for a lower priority for Barbarians than most other classes. But this allows the Barbarian to boost up their Constitution, which gives them more hit points, which is what they want, and still get a benefit to armor class. And again, I don't really see Unarmored Defense as being something that is meant to give a Barbarian a super high AC. Like a Monk, monks will get decently high armor classes. They're never going to be better than like paladins or fighters or anything like that. But like my 17th level Shadow Monk, I think has an armor class of 19 or 20. And 1 point of that is from an Ioun Stone of Protection. The rest of it's all from Dex and Wisdom. So now that's still 17th level, so you need an armor class that high. But Barbarians are not meant to have super high armor classes. However, if they couldn't get something to offset the fact that they're generally not going to be wearing much armor. All those additional hit points and the resistance to everything would kind of be made pointless. So yes, this does highly incentivize you to increase your Constitution modifier, which is going to give you more hit points, which is going to mean you can take a lot more damage. And your Dex modifier, you're going to want to have a decent amount in if you can, but you're normally, as a Barbarian, you're going to focus on your Strength and you're going to focus on your Constitution for when you're leveling things up, and then Dexterity is kind of a nice other thing. So yes, Unarmored Defense, relatively simple, but it does kind of round out the class and kind of point you in the right direction as far as where you want to put your ability scores. Moving on. At second level, you get Reckless Attack. Excuse me. Now, Reckless Attack is the other ability that a lot of people misunderstand, because they only look at the first half of it effectively, and they don't care about the other one. Reckless Attack, when you make your first attack on a turn, you can decide to attack recklessly. Doing so gives you advantage on melee weapon attacks rolls using Strength during this turn, but attack rolls against you have advantage until your next turn. So, everyone looks at the first one and goes, oh, Barbarians can give themselves advantage on all their attack rolls. And to be perfectly honest, most of the time, Barbarians Reckless Attack. Again, because they have higher hit points, because they have resistance when they're raging to physical damage, there generally isn't a huge downside to them using Reckless Attack almost constantly. And that's how a lot of people view it is, oh, but the attack rolls against you have advantage. Oh, that's a balancing factor. That's meant to make it so that Barbarians don't always use it, or they have to consider. No, that's not. The second half is intended to do that second thing that Barbarians are good at, which is taking hits for their friends. They make themselves a significantly better target. So that if an enemy has a choice between rolling with advantage against the Barbarian or rolling normally against another character, they're going to try against the Barbarian. The Barbarian already generally has a little bit lower armor class than a lot of other classes, because their dexterity score is generally not super, super high. And not a ton of Barbarians use shields, so a lot of Barbarians are sitting right around like a 14 armor class until they get to higher levels. Compared to most other classes that are going, most other melee classes are going to average out between 16 and anywhere between about 15 and 18, depending on whether you're wearing heavy armor or not, and whether you have a shield. So it's going to be a little bit easier to hit them, and now you get advantage on it. It's even easier to hit. Reckless Attack can be used both offensively and defensively. The aspect of it that gives attacks advantage against you is meant to encourage enemies to attack the Barbarian, because the Barbarian can take the hits. And any attack that hits the Barbarian instead of the Wizard is going to be an attack that is wasted. Or at least not as useful as it can be. Again, we talk about action economy all the time, because in 5th edition, action economy is one of the biggest balancing factors in an encounter. Whichever side has more actions that they can use is going to have the advantage. And whichever one is going to have more quality actions. You know, an attack action versus a multi-attack. Well, the multi-attack technically counts as multiple actions there. Or a spellcaster being able to do 8d6 damage against, everyone in a 20-foot radius circle or 20-foot radius sphere, versus someone that can make 3 attacks, but only against at most 3 different targets, and each attack does 20 damage. Well, the wizard's going to have a slightly more effective action. So Reckless Attack gets rid of some of the effectiveness of the actions of the enemy, because the damage that they're going to be doing is going to be lessened. And again, the Barbarian can take the hits. So as a percentage of life compared to other creatures, it's making their attacks worth less. And that's something that I try to emphasize a lot when I talk to people about playing the Barbarian is, yes, you can focus entirely on the Barbarian, me hit things. But you can just as easily play the Barbarian as very tactical and ensure that you're reckless attacking and putting yourself in positions where you are by far the most I can't think of the word right now. The best looking target for the enemies. Because again, you can take so much more. Healing a Barbarian tends to be more useful. Because again, because they have resistance while they're raging, hit points effectively count as double whenever you heal them, as long as they're taking physical damage. Obviously, again, against magic attacks, Barbarians, probably the best thing they can do is just run up and kill the spellcaster. But there's a lot of physical damage in 5th edition D&D. And so, yes, remember, Reckless Attack has 2 uses, not just 1. Moving on. The final thing that Barbarians get at 2nd level is called Danger Sense. And remember how I just said against magic they're not nearly as good because they don't get resistance to magic? Well, Danger Sense is how they deal with that. Again, Barbarians are meant to take more damage. Danger Sense, you have advantage on dex saves against effects that you can see, such as traps and spells. To gain this benefit, you can't be blinded, deafened, or incapacitated. So, advantage on dex saves. Again, Barbarians are generally going to have a little bit in their dexterity, but they're not going to be like a rogue or a ranger where they have like 16, 18, 20 dex ever. It's just not what they need. So with this, and the fact that they don't have proficiency in dex saves, this basically means they're going to have a much better chance to make their dex saves. And 9 times out of 10, if you're making a dex save, you're doing a save for half damage. So while, yes, you don't get resistance to all damage to the types, if someone throws a fireball at you, Danger Sense is going to make it so you still might take only half damage. And in the instance of traps, like a spike trap or something like that, if you make your dex save to take half damage and you are raging, so you have the resistance to basically physical damage, you're going to take half damage, and then you're going to half that damage because you only take, like, let's say you were supposed to take 10 points, or let's do 12 points to use numbers that have easier. So you're supposed to take 12 points of damage. Well, you make your save, so you only take 6 points of damage. However, that 6 points of damage hits your resistance. So you would only take 3 points of damage when you would normally take 12. And there are spells that do physical damage. Things like, I think it's Meteor or something similar to that. It calls down these big old meteors, and they do a combination of bludgeoning and fire damage. Well, fire damage, you would take full damage. Bludgeoning damage, you would take half damage from. So that's what Danger Sense is meant to do. It's to emphasize that second half of the Barbarian of just making them able to take more damage. Now, they specifically do dexterity saves, mostly as a limiting factor there, just so they're not just always having, advantage against all things, because that would make sense. And the idea and the lore behind Danger Sense itself is that they just have a heightened sense of bad things happening, and so they expect bad things to happen. They can react to it faster. So yes, those are the defining features of the Barbarian. So what can we do with those defining features to kind of modify them? Well, let's look at what they did in the Player's Handbook. So, as I mentioned before, and I've mentioned this in this series quite a few times, when you create a subclass, it needs to interact with your defining features somehow. It doesn't need to interact with every single one of them, but it should interact with them somehow because the base class is built around those defining features. As the class levels up, they get more and more useful. That's why they're defining features. That's That's one of the reasons why multi-classing is not completely broken. Like, if you can get the defining features of any class by just taking 2 levels into that class, well, it seems like, everybody should be multi-classing all the time. Well, yes, but the defining features when they are first introduced generally are not super game breaking. But as you get higher levels, they add more utility to the defining features and they become very, very powerful. But you need to level up in that class to do it. And if you're creating a subclass, you're kind of encouraging someone to level up within that class. So it somehow needs to tie into at least one of the defining features. So we're actually going to look at the 2 subclasses that are in these in the player's handbook. The first subclass for the Barbarian is the Path of the Berserker. This is your stereotypical Barbarian, and it leans super, super hard into the damage aspect of the Barbarian. So for Path of Berserker, the first thing you get at 3rd level is Frenzy. Basically, you can when you when you go into a rage, you can go into a frenzy. Now, it doesn't say it requires you to do anything to go into the frenzy. So most people have interpreted that as it's no action required. You can just choose to go into a frenzy, and it doesn't have to happen when you go into the rage. You can choose to do it whenever. The one downside of a frenzy is you gain a level of exhaustion after it. However, the good side is you can make a single melee weapon attack as a bonus action on each of your turns. So what does that mean? Well, it means those barbarians that are carrying around those great axes now get an additional attack that they can great weapon fight. That means that, again, we talked about the rage damage bonus, where it starts out at a +2. So once you get extra attack, that's 2, 4. Now Frenzy turns it into 6. And as the additional damage gets higher and higher, it means you get more and more. It also means that using magic weapons and the things like that for the Barbarian, especially any ones that proc additional damage, they're going to get more of a benefit out of that because they just get extra attacks. And it also means when they are using their reckless attack, they're going to get even more benefit out of it because they get an additional attack that they get to have advantage on. So the Frenzy specifically modifies your rage, and it specifically emphasizes the additional damage from the rage. And it does it super well. Berserker Barbarians are super, super fun to play. And they tend to be relatively simple to play. Again, you go in, you rage, you decide if you want to frenzy or not, and then you just kill things, and it works really, really well. As you go further, mindless rage kind of increases the defense effectively when you're raging. So basically, you can't be charmed or frightened when you're raging. So charming, because barbarians are going to have a high strength score, they're going to have a high constitution, and then the next one they're generally going to focus on is dexterity to give them a little bit better armor class, or charisma because being a charismatic, scary barbarian is super fun. Wisdom or intelligence tend to be dump stats for barbarians. And mind control style things or charm to style spells generally affect wisdom. So charming or mind controlling a barbarian tends to be a really, really useful thing because they do lots of damage and they're very hard to kill. So mindless rage kind of ensures that they're going to be able to do the damage that they want. It's that defensive aspect of the barbarian, ensuring that they're always going to be able to do the things that they want. When you get to 10th level, a lot of 10th level abilities for barbarians tend to be a little bit more role-playing focused. This one is not 100%. This one actually has a lot of use in combat, but it's not going to be something that gives you extra damage or anything like that. Somewhere between 6th and 10th level, you're generally going to get some sort of role-playing kind of aspect to it. Intimidating Presence, basically you can use your action to frighten someone. And because of Frenzy, that would mean that you could Intimidating Presence, which uses your action to frighten a creature, and then you could use your Frenzy to still make an attack on that turn. And the Frightened Kiddish is remarkably useful. They have disadvantage on all attack rolls and ability checks while they can see you effectively, and they can't willingly move closer to you. So again, from the idea of kind of controlling the battlefield, this can be extremely useful. I've talked before about the idea that if you frighten someone and then put the target that they're frightened of between them or near the person that you want to protect, there's no possible way that they can get anywhere near that character because they literally can't. And it just fits for the Berserker. So when you think about, well, how does this modify a defining feature? This is one of the instances where, like I said, not every single thing has to always attach to a defining feature. But it should interact with them in some way. So this one doesn't specifically attach itself to any of the defining features. But being able to frighten someone and then work with Frenzy while you're raging to still attack works really, really well. Frightening a creature can also mean that not only are you not going to take additional damage, but no one might take additional damage if they're a melee type thing, and you just move them to a spot where they can't actually get close enough to attack anyone. But again, none of those you can attach to a single defining feature or anything like that. So, and then finally, Retaliation. When you take damage from a creature that's within 5 feet of you, you can use your reaction to make a melee weapon attack against the creature. Again, that kind of fits into that rage aspect. The only real thing with Retaliation, because Reckless Attack only lasts on your turn, you would not get, even if you Reckless Attacked on your turn, you would not get the Reckless Attack from, or on your Retaliation. But it's still another attack. And again, barbarians want people to attack them. So this actually does kind of work with Reckless Attack, because by using Reckless Attack and making yourself a better target, you're getting a much better chance that you're going to be able to use your reaction to attack again. So yeah, that's the path of the Berserker. And you can see almost everything for the Berserker kind of fits along the idea of I'm going to help you just do more attacks and get the most out of the offensive version aspects of your rage. Now, if we move forward to Path of the Totem Warrior, the Path of the Totem Warrior is the other subclass that's in the Player's Handbook. I actually have a Totem Warrior Barbarian named Korn. It's like stuff you eat, but spelled with a K instead of a C. That's he was my allusion to Grog that I made back in the Adventurers League, and he's super fun to play. But he's a Totem Barbarian. Totem Barbarians are really, really interesting, especially since when Tasha's came out. One of the things that you can do for homebrewing is excuse me. One of the things you can do for homebrewing is you can just create additional totem. You can create additional options for things, because there's a couple different aspects, a couple of different subclasses that give you choices as far as what you can do with the subclass, and so just homebrewing additional options for totems and things like that can be really, really fun. The original version, well, let's first talk about Spirit Seeker. Spirit Seeker is mostly a flavor thing. It gives you the ability to cast Beast Sense and speak with animals, just to kind of fit into the flavor of a barbarian that kind of gets their power from nature and from animal totems specifically. But when you go to the totem spirits, when in the player's handbook, you have 3 different totem spirits that you can choose. And as you level up in this, each option that you get, you can choose is tied to one of these to the totem spirits. And you can choose the same totem spirit going all the way up. So like, I'm a bear barbarian, so all of my things are bear. Or you can choose a different one each time. But the 3 ones that launched with the player's handbook were the bear, the eagle, and the wolf. And then Tasha added the elk and the tiger. So this is actually a really, really good example when we're talking about homebrewing. Is really, really simple things, is just adding a new totem spirit. It doesn't require anywhere near as much as creating an entirely new subclass. You literally just have to create 1, 2, 3 new options for a class, and that's it. So this is generally tends to be a really nice place to start with homebrewing, because there's so little that you need to homebrew if you're just going to create a new to the totem spirit, and it tends to be significantly easier to balance because you only have those 3 things you have to worry about, not like the whole thing, and you have the other totem spirits to reference and to kind of go by for balance. Each one of the totem spirits does something a little bit different. Bear, for the 3rd level totem spirit thing, bear gives you resistance to all damage but psychic. So when you think about that idea of barbarians want to take attacks for their allies, bear gets that in spades. Bear totem barbarians are remarkably hard to kill, because unless you're hitting them with psychic damage, which is a relatively rare damage type, they're just not taking full damage almost ever. Whereas if you go eagle, other creatures have disadvantage on opportunity attack rolls against you, and you can use the dash action and a bonus action on your turn. So eagle actually works on the second aspect of the barbarian of you want people to attack you. You want people to take attacks for you. With eagle, you can actually run through the enemy, just provoking opportunity attacks to make it so, because opportunity attack takes your reaction. Everybody only ever has 1 reaction per round. So if they waste their reaction either missing you because they have disadvantage or hitting you but only doing half damage, you are really, really helping your allies and making sure that they're not going to have to worry about taking opportunity attacks if they need to get out of somewhere. And then wolf, while you're raging, your friends have attack on melee attack rolls against any creature within 5 feet of you that is hostile to you. Wolf not only is going to give you is not really going to help you as much as it is going to give a benefit to your allies, specifically your melee allies. So the wolf is going to make it most advantageous to kind of go with a buddy while you're doing this. And again, while you're doing this, if you're reckless attacking, when they have 2 targets in front of you, and one of them is like a paladin with like a 20 armor class, and the other one is a barbarian that only has a 16 armor class, and you have advantage against their attack roll, they're going to ignore the paladin, who can just sit there and smite him to death. They're going to go for the barbarian, and they're going to do less damage on it. So you can see, even when it looks like it's helping your allies, this is still interacting specifically with reckless attack to kind of work together. When you go to 6th level, again, these are just more kind of examples of different ways you can modify things. The 6th level ones tend to be a little bit more role-playing focused. Like the bear increases your carrying capacity and makes it easier for you to like do strong stuff, like push, pull, lift, or break objects. Eagle improves your eyesight and makes it easier for you to see in dim lights. And then wolf lets you track creatures a bit better. So all of those are outside of combat. None of them really interact with a defining feature in and of itself, but they all fit with the kind of theme of the subclass. And again, either 6th or 10th level, this is something you want to do when you're looking at creating homebrew subclasses, is a lot of homebrew, I won't say all of them, but most of them will have at least one feature that is a role-playing focused feature. And so you do need to look at those and make sure when you're adding features to your subclass that if in every other class it is a role-playing feature, that you add a role-playing feature. Otherwise, your subclass is going to feel unbalanced. 10th level, you can cast the Commune with Nature spell. And again, another kind of role-playing aspect. Again, the Barbarian itself is a pretty powerful class. So having both your 6th and 10th level abilities not always be associated with combat is still going to work but pretty well. And then 14th level, you get Totemic Attunement. And again, they're going to interact with things like the bear one. Any creature within 5 feet of you that's hostile to you has disadvantage on attack rolls against targets other than you or another creature with this feature. And an enemy is immune to this effect if they can't see or hear you, or if they can't be frightened. So again, this interacts directly with reckless attack. Now, not only might you have a buddy with you that has advantage on attack rolls against them, but now, if they wanted to attack that buddy, they're going to have disadvantage on the attack roll. Instead of just having advantage for your attack roll, they now have disadvantage. You're making you an even better target for their attacks. With Eagle, you get a flying speed, which, again, is going to interact with your rage a little bit, with the idea that you can get exactly to where you want when you are raging. And then for Wolf, you can use a bonus action on your turn to knock a large or smaller creature prone, which is really, really useful because melee attacks against creatures that are prone are made with advantage, and any attacks you make while you are prone are made with disadvantage. So this can be super useful as well, depending on how you want to play your character. Also, knocking it to the target prone, especially if, this can interact with the rage mechanic in a way that a lot of people don't think about, which is if you knock a target prone and you grapple it. Grappling is a contested check. It's going to be a strength athletics check versus either the creature's strength athletics or dexterity acrobatics. Well, if you're raging, you have advantage in all strength checks, which include strength athletics. So you can have advantage, and you already have a massively high strength score. So you could knock them prone with your bonus action, and grappling, you can actually replace one of your attacks with a grapple. So you could take the attack action, grapple them, and when they're grappled, their speed is reduced to 0. Now, to stand up from prone, you have to spend half your movement. If you have 0 movement, you cannot spend half of 0 to stand up. If you are grappled while you are prone, you can't stand up. So, using the wolf with rage to knock them prone, grapple them, and then take your attack against them means they're not getting up next to the turn. They can no longer go to anyone else. They have disadvantage on all their attack rolls. If they want to get ungrappled, they have to use their action to break the grapple, and that again turns into a contested challenge. Again, they can choose athletics or acrobatics. You are just going to use your athletics, which you have advantage on while you are raging. So even people sit there and go, well, wolf has nothing to do with that. No, it works really, really well with rage. And those are other things that you can kind of look at when you are building your subclasses, is thinking about, okay, well, what other things can I think about? Because most people will think, well, rage, do you do extra damage or strength-based attack rolls? Most people don't think about you get advantage on strength checks. So if part of your subclass gives them the ability to make a strength check to do something, it's going to interact with rage. In In the same way, if something in your subclass allows them to encourage an enemy to attack them, it's going to interact with their rage, the defensive aspect of it, or it may interact with reckless attack. You know, there's a lot of different ways that you can get those interactions so that they work really, really well. So, final thoughts. The Barbarian itself, again, is not super complicated. You might have noticed that this video is significantly shorter than the other ones that we've done. It's because the Barbarian, especially the Player's Handbook flavors of the Barbarian, are pretty straightforward. When we start going into the non-PHP stuff, you start getting a little bit more creative. But for the most part, when you are making homebrew, probably the easiest thing that you can do, and almost every single subclass you will see will do this, is give them additional benefits while they're raging. While you're raging, you can do this. You will see this constantly in every single one of these subclasses, and it's a good way. But don't forget about the other aspects of the Barbarian. Danger Sense and Reckless Attack are both really, really useful. Also, Unarmored Defense can be something that you can modify and do things. But Reckless Attack is the one that most people kind of don't think about. And one of the easiest ways to modify Reckless Attack in an interesting way is give on-hit effects when people hit you. What I mean by that is with Reckless Attack, you can turn it on, people have a much better, you become a much more inviting to target. And then if you say when you, again, when we were talking about the path of the Berserker, the retaliation, that interacts with Reckless Attack because it is in your best interest to get hit as often as you can so that every turn you're going to get a chance to use your reaction to do another attack. Other things like retaliation work really, really well, and you can get as creative as you want with it as long as you're willing to look at balance and things like that. So, yeah. Otherwise, that is going to be all for me today. As always, again, like, subscribe, turn notifications on in the comments down below. What is your favorite Barbarian that you can think of? Are you a fan of Minkskin Boo? Did you watch the original Dungeons & Dragons cartoon, either during its original run or finding it later on? Are you a fan of Grog? Would you like to rage? Let me know in the comments down below. Otherwise, again, that's all for me today, and I'll see you guys next time. All right? Bye-bye.